Hey everybody, I'm Jason Mefford and here with Brad Miller again, and we're walking a spiritual path. We're talking to you about walking a spiritual path. And today, we wanted to talk about a word that often comes up, in this space, especially if you're familiar with things like the Carlos Castaneda books, with Don Juan. He talks a lot about a word called impeccability. If you've ever read any of the stuff from Don Miguel Ruiz, like the Four Agreements, the first
Mhm,
one is be impeccable with your word. But impeccability and being impeccable are words that we don't use often in the English language. And there's a lot to them. It's a multi-layered thing, but we thought we just talk about it today a little bit, at least as far as
mhm,
how we understand or the experiences that we've had with it so far. But I think it's important too, that we kind of share with everybody why we're talking about this too, Brad, because
mhm,
we talk about trying, being more aware of things that are going on,
mhm.
looking at the signs or other things that are kind of coming your way. So you're the one that had the experience this week. So why don't you, tell people why we're talking about this funny word, impeccability?
While we're talking about impeccability, so you mentioned Carlos Castaneda, and so for the past 2 or 3 weeks, I've been going back and reading through the Carlos Castaneda books. I'd read the first four, I don't know, a year or so ago, maybe longer than that, and just kind of had the urge, I don't know, a couple weeks ago to go back and read through the series again. So, went through the first four that I've already read. Got additional things out of them that I probably missed the first time I went through them all. And then went through and started reading five, six, seven, and the last one, eight. I'm in the middle of right now at eight. And as I've been reading through these, one word that's kind of jumped out as I've been reading, and I've been kind of chewing on for the past couple days in particular, is this word impeccability. Because it's like you said, it's not really a word that we use a lot in normal conversation. Like we don't say, "Hey, Jason, how are you doing? You feeling impeccable today?" I mean, like we don't talk like that usually, and so and it's necessarily a familiar word for most people, and it's definitely not something that I am greatly familiar with. I don't use it very often, and definitely not in day to day. So I've been trying to figure out what exactly it means in a general sense, but what does it mean maybe for me? What does it mean for me to be impeccable? Am I impeccable now? How can I do to be more impeccable? Assuming that I'm not at the epitome of impeccability. And so that's again kind of been something I've been chewing on and thinking about the last couple of days. And normally that would be it, and I just kind of take it and do with whatever. But also part of these books is is listening to signs, looking for things out there that kind of give you messages. And I know we talked about that every morning I go ahead and I pick a animal medicine card, something that a lesson, an idea, something that I need that will help me through the day. If I, usually I say something like, if I embody this medicine, what would be the help me the best through the day for today. And so today I pulled the Jaguar. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Jaguar represents integrity and impeccability.
Mhm.
There's that word, right? So obviously to me that meant that that's something that I need to be going through. And rather than just struggle through it myself and keep it in, I thought that it would be a really good opportunity since we're recording this podcast episode today to talk about it, to go through it, to see what it means to you, Jason, and besides helping me out, I'm sure, it's something that can help out the listeners as well.
Yep. Well, and it's uh I'm taking a few notes here too because I gotta try to remember some of the stuff. The stream of consciousness is coming here to me. I always hated, when you go to conferences and people are like, "We're going to talk about this today, and here's the definition of this." But actually, the last little while, I've actually been doing this a little bit more because I think it's interesting. And so, actually, the word impeccable, right,
Hmm.
it's an adjective,
Hmm.
right? So the way it's kind of defined from, you know, I think this is from Oxford, is of behavior, performance, or appearance in accordance with the highest standards of propriety, faultless, right? So an example is a man of impeccable character. And so some similar, words, flawless, faultless, unblemished, spotless, stainless, untarnished, right? Kind of synonyms. But what's interesting too is there's also a rare theological use of the term, which is not liable to sin. Not liable to sin. And so again, sin is usually kind of it's a dogmatic sort of idea in religion to try to get people to not do certain things because you don't want to commit a sin, right?
Right.
But really, if we think about, from a bigger macro universal concept, there are basic codes of conduct. There are basic universal laws. And again, you can see these in a lot of the different ancient sacred texts. You can find them in things like Hermes Trismegistus, the Kabbalion, some
Hmm.
different ancient texts that actually talk about some of these kinds of things. And so, as you start to learn what those are, or the ones that you need to follow, this is where it comes that once you know, you can't unknow. Once you know, you can't unknow. And so it's important, that we only receive and learn things at the right time because, in a way, we're held accountable. Once you know better, you got to do better. And if you
Hmm.
don't do better at that point, then I guess from a religious, theological standpoint, you could consider that a sin, right? And a lot of it, again, it depends on intentions and everything else, right? But when we know and we don't do, that's when we're not being impeccable. When we know what codes of conduct are, how we are supposed to live our life, the words that we should use or maybe not use, right, to make us impeccable in our words, as well as in what we're doing, what we're thinking, and everything else. But that's really where the impeccability comes from, is that we're following that highest standard of propriety according to what we know we're supposed to do without judgment, right, for other people. Because again, just because I know something or I feel that I'm supposed to do or not do certain things, right, that may not apply to you, Brad, right? I mean, there are some basic universal codes like know thyself, do no harm, right? Those are a couple of the basic codes of conducts or maxims that are out there. And so I know those, right? And so,
Hmm.
do no harm. I love Brad. We're brothers. I should
But
do
not like
no.
literally mother brother thing. That's
Yeah, that's
so
different. That's a different thing,
yeah.
right? We're brothers from another
With
mother.
there you go.
But if I do something knowingly to hurt him, right, then I would not be impeccable. Now, I may do some things unconsciously, subconsciously that end up hurting him, but it's not my intention, right? But if I intend to hurt Brad, then I'm not being impeccable. If I choose to cast words that are dark spells at people, I'm not being impeccable with my word, right? Because that's not how I should use my power, because that's harming other people. And that's where Don Miguel Ruiz, in the Four Agreements, talking about he
Mhm.
was mainly about impeccability of the word, right? Are
Mhm.
you saying things to yourself? Are you saying things to other people that are effectively dark magic? And you're kind of placing a curse or a spell on people, or are you doing it from a light, standpoint?
Mhm.
And it's one I'll tell you, I've been trying. I see there's a word that creeps in, try, right?
Mhm.
That I'm getting rid of, but
Do or do not.
try,
There is no try.
yeah, try is another word that we probably should remove from our vocabulary because it's not being impeccable. You do or do not. There is no try, right? Um, and so the things that we say, the commitments we make to ourselves, the commitments that we make to other people, right? Are we being impeccable? Are we doing what we say we're going to do? And if we don't, are we fixing it,
Mhm.
right? Because that's part of being impeccable too. Because I've taught a lot of ethics trainings over the years. I was in charge of ethics at one of my companies too. And it's like, I've always tried to teach people, it's like none of us are purely ethical in the way that the idealists think of it. But the real difference between a person who's ethical or a person of integrity versus someone who is not, the biggest difference, when they make a mistake, they fix it as quick as they can. That to me is one of the differences of that makes a difference as to whether you're being impeccable, whether you're being a person of integrity, whether you're being ethical, whatever word you want to use,
Mhm.
is when you recognize that you did something, do you fix it? Fix it in the way that you can, because some things, cannot be
Sure.
fixed per se, but you make reparations in the best way that you can.
Mhm.
So that's a little start of kind of my thinking about
Yeah.
impeccability too.
Yeah, no, yeah, because I mean, I've read the Don Miguel Ruiz books as well, the Four Agreements, and that was always one. I mean, that's kind of what he talks about as the first agreement, the kind of the bedstone for the others is this idea of being impeccable with your word, the idea that your word is power. People say your word is your wand, but that your words have power because the words, I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, your words have frequency,
Mhm.
and frequency vibrations, that is what actually create things. You create your world around you through your predominant frequency. Um, and so that's when you're saying things, if you're saying, like you said the word try, well, that involves the fact that are you or aren't you? You talk about the doing things you say, or that you're going to do, and not doing the things you're going to say. That creates an issue of integrity. Kind of going back to kind of with the Jaguar there is, how and are you in integrity when you are making promises and not just to other people. We make promises to the people all the time. And if you're listening to this podcast, my guess is that you probably are fairly integral when it comes to other people. You tell someone you're going to do something, you do it. But what about when you tell yourself you're going to do things? Do you actually do them? You know, if you say, you know what, all right, next time I'm going to do this, do you do it? If you say, I'm not going to make the same mistake again, or I'm not going to act the same way the next time a situation presents itself, do you follow through on that? Or do you say, oh, well, and maybe conveniently forget about that, or go back to the way it was before? Those are all, to me, in the context of being impeccable with your word, part of that is, again, like you kind of what you said, you make a mistake, you fix it, you don't go back and make it again and again. Um, kind of back to that knowledge idea that once you know something, you're kind of expected to um follow it, to live by it, to go by. I mean, it's kind of the same thing with law.
Mhm.
It would, most of the stuff that I do was with contracts. And particularly, I help people buy and sell businesses. So in the contracts that I write, the parties, specific, especially the seller, give promises essentially about their business. They'll say things like, "The business is fully formed in this jurisdiction. It's a valid company, is in good standing with the state or whatever. It's not, it's paid all of its taxes. There are no liens or other sort of liabilities out there. Um, no one is trying to sue us, or there's no disputes or anything like that out there. They make all these little promises, but oftentimes there's a qualifier of knowledge.
Mhm.
And so you're only expected, the promise is only as good as what you know. So if you don't know someone has sued you yet, when you make this, then you're not held to that. Well, to the best of, as far as you knew, you weren't being sued.
Mhm.
As far as you knew, all your taxes were paid. So that doesn't let that keeps you from being opened up to liability by breaking these promises to the other side. The fact of did you actually have knowledge or not?
Mhm.
And it all goes back to this idea of just, and my mind just went that way. Um, yeah, sorry, my brain just went bloop
That's
bloop over
okay,
there.
right? No, and that's,
Yeah,
I mean, again, it's like for everybody listening, hey, this happens. This happens to us, happens to everybody, right? And so there's nothing to, it's just part of life.
yeah.
But I think it's, like you said, it's kind of interesting how a lot of these things have kind of crept into our culture in a lot of ways, but we don't really think about them anymore. And it's for one's character, of who you actually are and how you choose to hold yourself or what you choose to do, right? Is is important all the time, right? And a lot of people will maybe justify or rationalize certain behavior as being okay that's not really who they are, right? And again, it's not to say right or wrong, because again, under different circumstances and different things, sometimes things are good, sometimes things are bad, even though they're not good or bad, but you know what I'm saying, right? At least I hope so. Or am I having one of those moments
we
now
we
too?
talked we no we talked in a previous episode about things like that there's no such thing as good and bad. I think one of the contexts or examples you use was something like war,
Yeah,
is killing 100 people, is it good or is it bad if that saves 1 million people?
yeah, yeah. And I think as in being impeccable, it's when nobody's looking, when there's no, uh, when you get tempted, if you will, right? And again, I don't necessarily like that word because it has a lot of baggage, religious baggage associated with it. But we get put in situations where we can choose how we will respond. What frequency will we come at it from? Will we choose to respond with anger, or will we choose to respond with love or gratitude? Right.
Mhm.
And sometimes we may think it doesn't really matter, but it matters all the time in how we're doing it. Because, as an example, if I know that I need to do things in love, then I need to work pretty damn hard at doing everything I do with love. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to slip back into anger or other things at some point, but
Mhm.
my intention has to be continually vigilant in actually doing that, right?
Mhm.
And just to, I mean, again, it just kind of popped in. Last night I love Quentin Tarantino movies. So watched The Hateful Eight last night. And it's one of those where, again, it's a Tarantino movie and you might think it's not very deep, but it's very, very deep in a lot of different ways. It's not just violence and cursing, right? And there's a part right at the end of the movie where, like most Tarantino movies, everybody dies at the end. You
Spoiler
know,
alert, everybody.
spoiler alert, right? But if you've seen any of his movies, you kind of know that already. But but it was interesting because there was this dilemma that one of the characters had at the end. I mean, everybody was shot. There were three people that were left alive, and two of the people were on their way out because they were mortally wounded. They weren't getting out of this snowstorm in a couple of days, so they were going to die there. But the one person was bargaining with the other person of, look, you shoot the other guy and we'll give you this kind of a deal, right? And you could tell he was kind of mulling it over in his head a little bit because it was going to result in potentially a lot of money for him if he killed the guy that he was working with, right? Instead of, and switch sides, if you will.
Mhm. Mhm.
But, at the end of the day, he chose not to do that, right? It looked like he was going to do that, but he stayed true to his character. And even though maybe he considered it or he was like mulling it over, he's like, nope, I can't do that. That's not who I am. That's not who I am, who I choose to be, what I choose to do, or what I choose not to do. Right. So he stood up at that point where a lot of times we try to rationalize it and say it's okay. And we're actually going against, we're not being impeccable at that point. And another word that we use a lot in English is integrity. That kind of
Mhm.
goes along with impeccability. And the interesting thing about that definition is integrity actually, one of the main definitions is it means whole or complete,
Mhm.
which is an interesting concept that if we're actually, impeccable, if we're actually doing things with integrity, we're actually a more complete and whole being because everything we do, say, and think, right, is in line with the wholeness of who we actually are, our higher self. Uh, and when we deviate from that, then that's when we're not being impeccable.
It's kind of like the I can't think of who did it, but the quote of "To thine own self be true."
Yep.
Truing to who
True to
you
who you
are, and
are and what you need to do. And that's where there, we shouldn't have judgment because you may choose to make a different decision than I do,
Mhm. Right.
right? But it's just like, you know I'll just give you an example, right? I mean, I at this point in my life I'm not drinking alcohol anymore, right? I've gone different points in my life where I did, where I didn't. It's not that I have a habit. I mean, I've only been really drunk a handful of times in my life. So it's not that I've,
College.
uh, anyway. So, but there were, I've always, when I've drank, I've done so responsibly, right? There's maybe been one time when I shouldn't have gotten behind the wheel and I didn't realize it, but things like that where I've just always been very responsible in what my intake was, and never in never losing control or anything like that. So it's not like I have a problem that I need to quit because I'm an alcoholic and it's affecting my life. It's not that.
You're a damn drunk, Jason.
Yeah, I'm a drunk. Well, but just for some reason, all of a sudden I kind of felt like, it's probably a good time for you not to drink, at least for a little while. I don't know if how long it's going to be for, right? But it's right now I'm not. And believe me, I've still got a great liquor cabinet and wine selection in my house here, but I haven't touched it, right? And so that's something right now for me that I'm choosing to do until I decide to make a different choice, right? Because
Mhm.
again, for now, it's not right for me. Maybe it will be in the future. But because it's not right for me right now, I shouldn't go running down the hall, and guzzle down a fifth of whiskey because that would be going against, right, what I'm doing right now. And again, but that's no judgment on, anybody else drinking or not drinking, right? But if I'm in a social situation, let's say, and somebody's pressuring me to drink, right, what should I do? I should not do it, right? And I remember this story, and it popped into my head. It was I don't remember who the man was, but he had made a commitment to himself that he would only eat ice cream. He loved ice cream, but he would only eat ice cream when it was a blue moon. Like literally when the moon is in the blue moon full phase, right?
So the second blue moon of a month,
Yeah, which doesn't happen very often,
a couple
right?
times a
It doesn't
year. Yeah.
a couple times a year. And so it was his birthday, and his friends were like, "Come on, or get you a cake. You got to have ice cream." One of the women that was his friends dressed up like a blue moon, right? And they're like, "Hey, look, it's once in a blue moon. I'm here. You can have ice cream tonight." They were trying to, I mean, not
Hmm.
not to, not to goad the man or but they just wanted him to enjoy his birthday and
Sure.
knew that he liked ice cream. But even through all of that and the pressure that his friends put on him, he's like, nope, he didn't eat the ice cream because he'd made a commitment to himself to
Hmm.
only do it on a blue moon, right? So he was impeccable with the word that he had given to himself and honestly to the people around him. Because I think this is one thing that we don't realize too is that it's not just us who it's benefiting, but other people see our example.
Hmm.
And when we see how other people react, especially one person that I know that's very, very well known, very respected in my industry. I have not liked this person for a long time. And again, it's nothing personal, but I see how they show up publicly and how they pretend publicly because I have seen them in private situations act contrary to that.
Hmm.
And so I know that person is not whole. They're not a person of integrity. They act one way in public for the prestige and the business side of it, and they're a real
Hmm.
asshole on the personal side, right? And I don't appreciate that. I can see the energy differences. I don't like it, right? So that's an example too of not being impeccable. So it can be stark, but it also, for me, it's even some of the words that I use when I use the word try and I know better.
Hmm.
I wrote down higher words because I think that's another thing that I'm starting to learn too in English is what's a higher frequency word I could use instead of the dumbed down word that most people actually use. Right. And so I'll give you an example. The movie The Princess Bride, right?
Hmm.
Okay. Um, there are some great lines in that movie where they're just like cussing out somebody else and calling them names. Only they're not calling them profane names. They're using these big words, right? Which to me it's kind of funny, but not so at the same point too, right? It's just like if we stop and start kind of thinking about some of the words that just creep into our life, do we have an opportunity to use different words or words with higher frequency? So I'll give you an example. Cute, adorable, beautiful. Similar words,
Hmm.
but they all have a different frequency.
Hmm.
That's what I'm playing with.
Now, for me, it takes place because I've got a 9-year-old
Hmm.
looking at me every day. And so I
Hmm.
have to be very cognizant of the things that I say, obviously, but also the way I behave, the actions that I take, the things that I do. She's watching. The best examples are when I can see her mimicking, not necessarily intentionally, like, making fun of it, but when I see some of my mannerisms in her, or when we see some of my wife's mannerisms, some of the things that she says, you can tell that this is not something that we taught her necessarily. We didn't say, oh, when this situation you do this or whatever. She's just seen us reacting or saying things or, somehow doing something, and she's grabbed onto that and doing it herself. And so that's, yeah, I mean, for me, that's a everyday example of something I have to keep in mind, and why our kids are our greatest teachers
Hmm.
because they're mirrors of kind of who we are. And if you do something, you may think that no one else is seeing you, but I can pretty much guarantee they will see you do it. And you'll find out when they say it to the other person or they start repeating it, or somehow it comes through. Like they know and they see a lot more than we realize. So you kind of always have to be, like you said, you can't just assume that, hey, it's behind closed doors.
No,
You've got to be 100%. I really like that idea, the concept of acting one way behind, in public and one way in private. Um, and how that is an example of someone who's not in integrity, or who's not being impeccable. If there's two sides, if they put on a show essentially for people in public, which is different than who they actually are, their essence is in private.
yeah, and you can start to tell. And I mean, again, I'm sure I do some of this. I mean, I don't mean to
Oh,
to
none of
be
us are.
hypocritical or judgy of
Yeah.
anybody because I'm sure. I mean, some of my friends tell me, and it's like, oh, I did what? What? Are
Hmm.
you kidding me? Right? But I think this is one of those things where it's just an everyday getting better at it.
Hmm.
Every day, the
Yeah.
more that we place attention and awareness on it, the more we're checking our intentions behind everything that we're doing.
Hmm.
The more that we're taking responsibility for our part in everything. Because I think that's a part of impeccability too, is
Hmm.
actually, you know, taking responsibility for what we did. And that's why, like I said, if we do something that caused harm, we need to fix it. We need to do what we can to fix it. Uh, because that's part of the process of rectifying, what we have done wrong. I mean, it's again, I mean, we were talking about the law before, but
Hmm.
it's the same thing. I mean, there's legal precedences and other stuff like that too of if someone is harmed in a certain way, then there is a way, for people to be compensated or for people to make restitution for damage, for hurt that they have inflicted upon other people, right? And so we see that as an example in the
Hmm.
law as well, but it's also in line with these universal laws and codes of conduct that we're talking about too.
Yeah. So then I guess to kind of take everything we've talked about and maybe kind of wrap it up here and put a bow on it and send it on its way, what would we say then is the practical aspects of impeccability for day-to-day life. And how is this something that we're going to be working on for our spiritual path? 'Cause, I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what this podcast is about, the spiritual path. And yes, everything you do is part of your spiritual path. Everything in life is on that path,
Mhm.
you know. But I think sometimes it can be easier if you sometimes if you can kind of separate it in your head a little bit about how this applies to day-to-day stuff. That way it doesn't seem quite so out there. You know, if you're thinking, oh, spiritual, woo-woo stuff out there, sometimes you can get kind of, okay, yeah. But if we can really kind of narrow it down to the practical aspects and how really that is going to impact the spiritual path. Um,
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of it is it's the all of these things that we do, right? We know when we're doing right by us, for what's right for us. And we know if we're honest with ourselves when we're not. And these things usually, again, it goes back to emotions and to frequency and vibration. And so if we're not being impeccable, chances are we're going to feel shame. We're going to be down in anger if somebody finds out about something, if they find out that we're hiding something, and that just drops you back down significantly below love or gratitude, right?
mhm,
And so even though it seems like 3D things, right, where we're at in our vibration is part of our spiritual path, right?
mhm,
The other thing too is that the more impeccable you are, the more power you reclaim,
mhm.
right? And again, it's not like megamaniac, power thirsty. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about personal power and about regaining our personal power while we're here on this earth. And part of that is being impeccable, right? If you've made a mess, you got to clean it up,
So
right?
I tell my daughter, yep.
If you make a mess, you got to clean it up. I mean, that's part of being impeccable too. And when you know better, you've got to do better, right? And
Mhm,
it's not to say that we need to be hard on ourselves about it either, because that's not the point either. That has the opposite effect we want it to have anyway too. But the more impeccable we are in what we think, in what we say, and in what we do, the better we feel about ourselves, right? And the better we feel about
mhm,
ourselves, the better we treat other people, right? Because hurt people,
mhm,
right? If we're not hurting, chances are we're not doing harm, right? And so that's following again one of those
mhm,
codes of conduct. And if we're not doing harm, but we're doing good, right, then we're spreading that good out into the world and we're having that impact on helping to elevate and raise other people's frequencies as well. And so again, I know it doesn't seem like, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, um, it's the little things that you do that make such a big difference that you have no idea what a big difference it makes.
mhm,
People want to talk about becoming enlightened and ascending. Great, great. But as you are elevating, evolving, ascending yourself, and the irony is, as you're helping other people do it, you're
mhm,
actually doing it for yourself as well.
mhm,
But a lot of times, if we're only doing it for ourselves and not having it go outside of us, right?
mhm,
Like going and sitting and just going for hours and hours a day, only focusing on clearing your mind and elevating your consciousness only helps you. And that's not why we're here. We're here to help ourselves, but the bigger thing is to help other people as well.
mhm,
So every kind word that we
mhm,
say, every smile that we give, every promise that we keep to ourselves and to other people. It doesn't
Hmm.
seem like it, but those are all elevating you spiritually and elevating everyone around you spiritually as well.
So there you go. That's why you should be impeccable.
My take on it, at least for
Yeah.
now, like I said.
Like I said, this is something that I've been chewing on. Again, kind of it's been coming up in some things I've been reading, and um, it's obviously something that I think is important to kind of get your mind wrapped around. Because just the benefits it sounds like to you, to others, when you are impeccable. So, so, so I guess with that, we'll kind of wrap it up for this week. Thank you guys for tuning in. Hopefully you got something out of this today that's going to help make your life a little bit better, maybe help make your walk on the path a little bit lighter. Um, Obviously, we love to hear about it. If you do, shoot us a comment or, let us know, how this is going for you. But otherwise, hope you have a great week and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
All right. See you, everybody.